In the name of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Please be seated. Well, happy fourth week of Advent. We have just 1 week left to our celebration and the joy of Christmas. As we were preparing for the Christmas pageant that we had last week, I was talking to Leighton, our children's ministry director, and I was telling her about the fact that Joseph so often gets shortchanged in the nativity story. And it's not just that Joseph is in a supporting role in the story. The fact is, the Bible doesn't give us much information about him at all. Think for a moment about your favorite quote from St. Joseph in the Bible. Well, if you can't think of one, it's because none exists. He is silent in the Bible. We don't have a word from him. Not a single word. There's a meme that I once saw with a painting of St. Joseph, and it looks like a holy card. And at the top, it says, "My favorite quote from St. Joseph." And at the bottom is just 2 empty quote marks. But there's a worse one that I saw this week. It was a picture of St. Joseph that read, "Happy belated St. Joseph's Day." To be fair, nobody cared on March 19th either. Oh, terrible. And I was upset by that one because I'm a big St. Joseph fan. And our lesson today in the gospel is about St. Joseph. But the reason I'm such a big fan of St. Joseph, it isn't because he's silent. It's because I think he actually has so much to teach us, not in what he said, but in how he lived. In fact, I think his witness may be even more important because instead of words, we have his actions to study. So what do we know about St. Joseph in the Bible? We know, first of all, he was chosen by God, just as Mary was, to be a parent to Jesus, to God's Son, to raise Jesus as his dad here on earth. And it's a pretty impressive job description and calling. Joseph is described in the scriptures as being faithful to the law, or righteous, to be just. And it speaks volumes about him there. He was a holy man who was given one of the most important jobs imaginable as Jesus' dad. Imagine Joseph in that role. Imagine him holding and playing with baby Jesus, just doting on him like a loving father, like so many dads we all know and love. We also read about the hard choices that Joseph had to make. We see that he always put others' interests before his own. He was very well aware that Mary had become pregnant, and he knew it wasn't his child. But he still wasn't willing to subject her to public disgrace. This is before any information from God about this. All he knew was she was pregnant. It wasn't his. But this isn't a man who acted out, which could be justifiably righteous anger or even vengeance, because despite what looked like a very painful betrayal by his betrothed, he's gracious. He's just going to quietly dismiss her. However, Joseph clearly had an open heart and spirit. And like that biblical hero of Joseph in the Old Testament, we see that God communicates to Joseph in dreams. Actually, do you know, trivia here, do you know how many times an angel comes and communicates to Joseph in a dream? It's 3 times. 3 times this happens. And on the very first occasion of the divine dream that we just read, he is told not to be afraid to take Mary as his wife because her child was conceived by the Holy Spirit. She's going to have a son, and he's to name him Jesus, which means, of course, God saves. Joseph wakes up from this dream, and he has faith. He has faith that something miraculous, actually impossible, was happening. And like Mary and the other saints, Joseph obeys what God commands despite how clearly challenging this is. Joseph is a model, I think, to all parents, certainly to all dads, but maybe especially to stepdads. Those fathers that choose to marry and take on the role of dad, stepdad to children that are not their own, or any parent that does this. Throughout history, much is made, of course, about fathers having children to pass on their genetics and their name. But in contrast, there are those men, those parents like Joseph, for the sake of love, who choose to raise children that are not their own biologically. I think Joseph is then a patron, a model of this kind of parental love for all such dads, stepdads, step-parents. And we need parents like this. We need dads like this, like Joseph here on earth. And notice that Joseph never makes it about himself. Never once. He is there simply to support Mary and Jesus in their calling. He shows true sacrificial love. Because after this act of marrying Mary and taking on this role of being dad to Jesus, Joseph has another dream from God, and he's told to flee his home, to go to Egypt, to protect Jesus, of course, whose life is threatened by Herod's command to kill all the baby boys under age 2. So Joseph, again in faith, obeys and simply acts. He does what he needs to do. He leaves his homeland. He leaves all his family, all his friends. He leaves his job, and he moves far away to protect his wife and child. He saves Jesus' life and protects Mary once again. Then he has that third dream, the dream when he's told that it is safe to return. So he goes back. Joseph is home with Mary and Joseph. And what does he spend his time doing? Is it flashy? Does he draw a lot of attention to himself? No, he just goes back to work. He just goes back to being the humble, honest, stable carpenter, providing for his family. And no doubt teaching Jesus some of the carpentry skills along the way. Joseph also just very simply ensures that Jesus is raised in faith, with devotion to God in the Jewish faith. We know this because we read again of his actions in the Bible. He takes Jesus with Mary after his birth to the temple to be dedicated in observance of the law. We read also that Joseph takes his family to visit Jerusalem every year to celebrate Passover, to commemorate the festivals and holy days. We read that Jesus, of course, learns. He engages with rabbis at age 12. And we read that Jesus, quote, increased in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and others. So Joseph is just providing Jesus this simple but stable life in faith. And after that, we hear nothing else about Joseph. We don't know anything about when he died or how he died. We don't hear about him in Jesus' later life. A lot of scholars believe he was probably of older age when he married Mary because of it. But we don't know. It's totally quiet on that front. All we can see is a simple, humble life lived faithfully to God. It's amazing to think of the cosmic significance of Joseph and his role in just being a good dad and husband, in being willing to raise Jesus as his son. And in doing that, he helped support Jesus' calling and mission to save the world. For you and me, the reminder is that we cannot and should not underestimate our lives here on earth, even when they might appear less than glamorous or significant. Because just living a faithful life of faith, just quietly living out the tasks given to us in work and family, that can be the most important thing imaginable. Your day-to-day life, when it's lived in love and faith, is incredibly important to God and to God's story. living a life of faith, just doing the things God invites you to do day to day. Simple as they may seem, those can and are the catalyst for bringing God's kingdom here on earth. Our task this Advent is a simple but profound one: to live faithfully, listening and preparing for whatever daily task God has for us. And like St. Joseph, we may never know the immense difference and value our lives may have on those around us or even the world. Being faithful in the little things like Joseph leads to being faithful in the big things. And that's how God's kingdom spreads. That is how the good news is made manifest in our world. That is how God transforms this world and saves us all. That is how God, Emmanuel, comes to be with us and live with us at Christmas.